Title: 72 Hours in the Silence Zone. The signal disappears. When Mark Sanders drove his Jeep into the Santa Rosa Wild National Park, he was looking for silence. A real escape from the noise of Los Angeles and his high-paying but exhausting job in IT. He wanted to spend 3 days in nature. No calls, no emails, no people. Just him, his tent, and the untouched wilderness of Arizona. But 2 hours after driving deeper into the forest, his phone displayed no signal. The GPS froze and then shut down completely. At first, he wasn't worried. This was exactly what he wanted. He parked the Jeep at the base of a hill, pulled out his backpack, and started hiking toward a lake where he planned to camp. He didn't know that a rare solar storm had completely wiped out communication across a 200-mile radius. No radio, no GPS, no cellular service. Nothing worked. People in nearby towns didn't even realize the signal was gone. But deep in the forest, a different game had already begun. The first night, by the time the sun had set, Mark was roasting hot dogs over a small fire by the lake. He enjoyed the quiet sounds of nature. But near midnight, he heard branches crack. Not from the wind, and not from a rabbit. Something big was moving nearby. He grabbed his flashlight, stood up slowly, and walked toward the sound. In the darkness, a pair of eyes reflected the light. He quickly stepped back, but whatever it was didn't follow him. Mark returned to the fire, but sleep never came. That was when he realized he wasn't just in the wilderness. He was trapped. No water. The next morning, Mark discovered his water filter was broken. The lake looked clean, but after a few sips, he became nauseous. He searched for a stream, but all he found were dry riverbeds. His body was weakening, the sun was burning, and his head spun. He had to remember everything he learned as a teenager at survival camp. He built a basic solar, still using sticks, plastic, and stones to collect condensation overnight. He managed to gather less than a cup of water. He began to recall all the survival books he'd read. But theory was no match for the hunger and dehydration his body now suffered. Someone's watching. On the third day, he noticed footprints, not from an animal. Human boots, and he was certain there should have been no one within miles of him. These prints were fresh, and they followed his trail. He set traps, not to catch an animal, but to confirm someone was out there. One of the traps tripped. Inside it, a torn piece of cloth with the initials JT and the strong smell of gasoline. The 72nd hour. Almost too weak to stand, Mark tried to return his Jeep, but it was gone. In its place, an empty patch of dirt, like the vehicle had never been there. He collapsed. The sun blazed. His lips cracked. His vision blurred. And then a man in camouflage stepped out of the trees. "You weren't supposed to come here," the man said. "Who are you?" Mark croaked. "You're a witness. In this area, we protect it. There's no signal here for a reason." Before Mark could understand, darkness swallowed him. Epilogue. Rescue? For days after he disappeared, a National Park Service helicopter spotted an emaciated man lying among pine trees. They airlifted him out. He survived. But when asked where his Jeep was, why he wandered without communication, and who the man in camouflage was, he said nothing. Maybe because he knew no one would believe him. Or maybe because someone had already warned him. If you talk, you'll never return there. But your kids might. The first warning. Mark awoke in a hospital bed, his body weak, attached to 4 drips and machines humming softly. A nurse looked surprised when she saw his eyes open. "You're lucky," she said. "They found you just in time." But Mark's mind wasn't on gratitude. His memory was a blur of heat, thirst, and that final moment, the man in camouflage. He hadn't been hallucinating. He remembered the words clearly. That evening, a man in a dark suit came to his room. No hospital ID, no name tag, just a quiet presence and a cold smile. "You were in the restricted northern sector," the man said calmly. "There's a reason it's off limits. We've already flagged your story as dehydration-induced delirium. No one will believe what you saw." Mark's heart pounded. "My Jeep was there. It disappeared. That wasn't a dream." The man didn't blink. "And if you say otherwise, your name might just disappear too. Enjoy your second chance, Mr. Sanders. Don't waste it." He left without another word. Over the next week, Mark stayed silent. He told doctors the story they wanted, that he got lost, suffered heat stroke, and hallucinated most of it. But late at night, he searched. He found nothing. Satellite images of the area were blank. No road markings. No lake. No northern trail. It was as if the entire section of forest had been erased. But then, a package arrived at his apartment in L.A. No return address. Inside, a folded map with hand-drawn markings, a note in shaky handwriting. You're not the only one. If you want answers, come to Blackstone, New Mexico. Ask for JT. Mark froze. Those were the initials on the cloth in the trap. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. Blackstone's shadow. Blackstone, New Mexico, was the kind of place most travelers passed through without noticing. A single gas station, a diner with flickering lights, and a town square that hadn't changed since the 1950s. Mark drove in at dusk, the horizon painted with burnt orange and deep violet. He parked his car near a rusted water tower and stepped out, gripping the folded map he'd received. The only instruction he had was to ask for JT. The diner was nearly empty. A few locals stared at him as he walked in, the bell above the door giving a tired ding. The waitress, in her late 50s, with sun-leathered skin and a cigarette tucked behind her ear, approached. "Out-of-towner?" she asked, eyeing him. "Just passing through," Mark said cautiously. "Looking for someone." JT. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes flicked to a man in the corner booth, older, wiry, with a camouflage cap and a limp. He hadn't touched the coffee in front of him. The man stood up before Mark could approach. "Follow me," he said, his voice like gravel. "Now." They exited through the back, walking past dumpsters and into the narrow alley behind the diner. The man turned suddenly and stared hard at Mark. "You should have never come back," he said. "I didn't come for fun," Mark replied. "You left me a map." "I left that map 3 years ago," JT said slowly. "You just got it now." Mark's stomach sank. "I was part of the survey team that first mapped Zone 7C, the area you were in," JT continued. "We found structures underground. Technology not ours. Radiation spikes that didn't match any isotope in the chart. And then the suits came." "You mean the man who visited me in the hospital?" Mark asked. JT nodded grimly. "Same ones who erased our reports, burned the access roads, scrubbed the satellite feeds. They've been hiding something out there for decades." Mark tried to steady his breathing. "What did you see?" JT looked away. It wasn't human. Before Mark could ask more, headlights swung into the alley. A black SUV. Windows tinted. No plates. "Go," JT hissed. "That's them. What about you?" "I'm already gone." JT shoved a flash drive into Mark's hand and vanished into the night, ducking behind dumpsters and scaling a back fence like a ghost. The SUV door opened. A man stepped out, the same one from the hospital. Mark ran. He didn't look back until he was speeding down the desert highway, dust rising behind him, the flash drive gripped tight in his fist. On the dashboard, his phone lit up. No signal. The flash drive. Mark didn't stop driving until he was over 100 miles from Blackstone, deep into the high desert, where the only sounds were wind and the low growl of his engine. He pulled into a rundown roadside motel, the kind where no one asked questions and the curtains never moved. Room 6. Peeling wallpaper. Faint smell of mildew. But it had an outlet and a lock on the door. That was enough. He pulled the chair to the corner farthest from the window and opened his laptop, inserting the flash drive JT had handed him. At first, nothing. Just a folder named Echo 7C_logs. Inside it, encrypted documents, video files, geolocation data, and audio logs dated from 2002 to 2005, long before Mark's time in the zone. The first video was shaky, grainy, shot from a helmet cam. A voice whispered through the static. Echo team entering breach point at 1947. Geiger readings climbing. Structure appears artificial. The screen showed a team of 5 moving underground through a tunnel of smooth metallic walls. Symbols glowed faintly on the surface. Not English, not any human language Mark had ever seen. The video cut in and out as if reality itself was breaking up. Then the screaming started. Not human, not animal. The footage ended with a blinding white flash and silence. Mark sat frozen. The next file was a log report from JT. Echo, 7C Field Log number 19. One of our men didn't come back. Not dead, just missing. No blood, no sign. The wall pulsed right before he vanished. We think it's some kind of portal, but it doesn't follow laws we understand. Orders are to seal the tunnel. Bury it. Deny everything. Mark stared at the screen, heart racing. This was real. The government had found something, a structure, a technology, maybe even a life form, and covered it up. And he had just walked into it. A new window suddenly opened on his laptop. Connection lost. Remote access attempt blocked. Someone had found him. He slammed the laptop shut, grabbed the flash drive, and pulled the curtains closed. Outside, a car slowly rolled past the motel. Its lights were off. He turned off every light in the room and waited. For hours. At 3:11 a.m., his phone buzzed despite showing no signal. A single message appeared. We warned you, Mark. They're watching. Mark didn't sleep. He sat on a motel bed with his back to the wall, eyes fixed on the door, laptop shut, flash drive hidden inside the lining of his backpack. Every time the wind howled outside, he jolted. Every pair of headlights on the road made his heart stutter. At 6:12 a.m., he quietly slipped out. No breakfast, no checkout, just gone. He headed toward Flagstaff, Arizona, the closest city where he could disappear in crowds. But halfway down the highway, a black sedan appeared in his rearview mirror. No plates, no headlights. Matching his speed, he made a sudden turn onto an unpaved back road and floored the gas. Dust billowed. He took sharp turns, kicked up gravel, and nearly hit a deer. After several miles, he pulled behind an abandoned gas station and waited. The road remained empty. By noon, he reached a public library on the edge of Flagstaff. He used a burner laptop he'd stashed at a storage unit months ago, a habit from his paranoid hacker days. No Wi-Fi, only Ethernet. He opened the flash drive again and scanned more files. One folder stood out. Subject _ Theta 17, motion captures. Inside, short black and white surveillance clips. He clicked the first one. A grainy hallway. Fluorescent lights flickering. At the end of the corridor stood a tall figure. Too tall. Slender. Its head slightly tilted like it was listening. As the camera zoomed, the image warped. The lights burst, the feed went black, and the timestamp froze. Another clip. A desert trail at night. The same figure, only now moving impossibly fast, frame to frame, without walking. It stared straight into the lens. Mark's breath caught. Something inside him knew it was watching him, not just the camera. The presence he'd felt near the lake. It wasn't just his imagination. He opened a final file. A voice memo from JT, barely audible. We don't think it's from here. Not from space either. It's like it bleeds in from somewhere else. Every time it appears, people vanish. But only the ones who notice it. Mark's blood ran cold. He'd seen it. He'd noticed. He stood and walked toward the library's exit. The sun was high, the street quiet. But across the road stood the same black SUV. Engine off, windows black. A man leaned against it, arms crossed. Not the same man from the hospital. This one was younger, dressed casually, too casually. But his eyes were cold like stone. Mark didn't go out the front. He ran through the stacks, out the back emergency exit, and into the alley. He'd memorized enough cities to know how to vanish. Within minutes, he was inside a subway tunnel construction site, hopping a fence, disappearing through a maintenance corridor. But this time, he knew. They weren't just watching. They were hunting. The safe house. By nightfall, Mark had reached a place he hadn't visited in years. An old concrete shed buried in the northern Arizona hills, camouflaged by rock and scrub brush. It was a relic from his college days, when he and a few underground tech friends had used it as a remote safe house to run experiments, hacking servers, intercepting signals, trying to pull secrets from the invisible corners of the internet. Now, it would be his bunker. The shed had no internet, no phone lines, no GPS signals, just a generator, some dry supplies, and an old laptop wrapped in foil. He bolted the door behind him and sat in the flickering light of a single bulb. The air inside smelled like dust and cold metal. Safe. Or at least, safer than the outside. He powered on the old laptop and reinserted the flash drive. This time, a folder had appeared that hadn't been there before. Warning: initiate protocol. Echo collapse. Mark clicked it. A warning flashed. Are you sure? This data will reveal classified anomalies and may trigger surveillance response. His finger hovered, then clicked yes. The screen filled with maps. Locations. Not just the site in Arizona, but dozens across the US, Canada, even parts of Central America. Each marked with the same red symbol. A vertical oval with 3 lines through it. In one corner, known breach events, 116. Documented disappearances, 1,904. And then he saw it. Image _ 17. A. Mark Sanders, subject tag, witness. His photo, his file, his medical records, even his psych profile. They had been tracking him before he ever set foot in the forest. He wasn't just a man who got lost. He was bait. Outside, a soft click echoed through the darkness. The metal latch of the shed door shifted. Mark stood still. Another sound, something dragging across the exterior wall. He slowly moved to the back corner, grabbed a small crowbar he kept near the vent, and crouched low. The lights inside flickered. The generator hiccuped once, then twice. Then silence. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the heavy, unnatural kind. Like the forest before a predator strikes. A shadow passed by the single crack under the door. Tall. Still. Listening. He held his breath. Then a voice, whispering through the vents, low and hollow. You've seen it now, Mark. You belong to the breach. He didn't wait. Mark smashed the vent open, squeezed through, and rolled out into the thorny darkness of the hills. He ran, stumbling, bleeding from cuts, lungs burning. Behind him, the door of the shed slowly creaked open. But no one stepped out. Only the wind, and the scent of something wrong. The contact. Mark didn't stop running until the hills gave way to a dry riverbed under the pale Arizona moon. His body ached, his shirt was torn, and his mouth tasted of copper. He finally collapsed behind a boulder, heart hammering against his ribs. He waited. Nothing followed. No lights. No shadows. No whispers. Just silence, the natural kind this time. The wind in the grass. A coyote's howl in the distance. He stayed there for hours, until the sun began to rise over the desert. That morning, Mark knew he couldn't survive alone. Whatever this thing was, the breach, the creature, the people chasing him, it was bigger than any one man. If he was going to make it out alive, he needed help. And there was only one person who came to mind. Ava Trent. She had been part of an independent research firm that once challenged military secrecy around national parks and anomalous disappearances. They called her a conspiracy theorist on TV. But Mark knew better. She'd once exposed an entire shadow project in Utah. He had her old contact code buried in a backup email. It took him 2 hours at a payphone in a gas station to route a call through a chain of proxies. Finally, a woman's voice answered. This line shouldn't be active, she said. Ava, it's Mark Sanders. I was in Echo 7C. Silence. Then, where are you? An hour later, he received instructions by text. Come to Pueblo Station. Noon. You'll be met. Mark arrived early, blending into a small crowd at the train platform. Pueblo was an old mining town with barely 400 people. He scanned every face, heart racing. Then he saw her, Ava, wearing sunglasses, a denim jacket, and a satchel slung over her shoulder. She looked just like her old photos, sharp eyes, purposeful stride. She didn't speak until they were inside an abandoned freight depot nearby. You weren't supposed to survive that zone, she said. No one does. I did, Mark replied. And I saw it. I have proof. He handed her the flash drive. She plugged it in her laptop. As she scrolled, her eyes widened. This is deeper than I thought. Then she froze. On her screen, a blinking warning. Echo collapse, protocol flagged. Transmission detected. Tracking engaged. She looked up at him. They know we're here. Suddenly, outside the depot, car engines roared to life. 3 black SUVs. Doors slammed. Boots hit the gravel. Ava yanked the laptop, shoved it into her bag. We move. Now. She led Mark through a service tunnel beneath the platform. Old bricks. Cold air. Emergency lights blinking red. The roar of boots echoed behind them. They won't stop, Ava said breathlessly. You've seen the breach. You're part of it now. They emerged in a scrapyard behind the depot. Ava had a rusted pickup. It was okay. Because love, in this new version, wasn't about finishing each other's stories. It was about helping each other write the next page. Her own chapter begins. A week after their ferry ride, Lily woke up early, earlier than Edward, who had fallen asleep at his desk again, still surrounded by manuscripts and half-empty teacups. She slipped on his oversized sweater, padded across the wooden floor in bare feet, and made herself a cup of coffee. But instead of reaching for her journal, she reached for the notebook she had once tucked away, the one from New Haven. The same notebook where, years ago, she had written about love and fear and the silence between those things. She hadn't opened it in months. This time, she didn't write poetry. She wrote a story. It started simply. A woman on a train, traveling not toward a destination, but away from her own silence. Each line came slowly, hesitantly at first, like Lily was knocking on a locked door with no idea who might answer. But by the time the sun rose over the city and streaked golden light across the living room, her pages were filled, and something in her chest, something long asleep, began to breathe again. Later that afternoon, she wandered into the East Village alone, notebook in hand. A flyer in the bookstore window caught her eye. Open mic for first-time writers. No judgment, just stories. Friday, 6 p.m., Paper Lantern Book Cafe. She stood there staring at it. And for the first time in years, she didn't walk away. Friday, 6:04 p.m. The bookstore cafe was warm and alive with quiet energy. People sipped tea and leaned into one another's stories. A string of fairy lights lined the stage, which was really just a rug in front of Mike and a chair. Lily signed her name on the open mic list. She was fifth. Her palms were sweating. She sat alone at the edge of the room, her notebook trembling slightly in her hands. Edward didn't know she was here. She hadn't told him. This was for her. When they called her name, her knees felt soft, but she walked forward anyway. She sat on the stool, adjusted the mic, and began to read. Her voice at first was quiet, but as the story unfolded, the woman on the train, the letters in her bag, the bench at the station, her voice grew stronger. People leaned in. A man in the corner stopped typing. Someone nodded softly at a line about loving in silence. When she finished, there was no eruption of applause, just soft clapping and something better, the kind of silence that follows something true. Afterward, a woman in her 40s approached her. That was beautiful, she said. Have you ever thought about teaching? We run a creative writing class here for women rebuilding after trauma. I think you'd be perfect. Lily blinked. I haven't taught writing before, she admitted. The woman smiled. That's okay. You've lived it. She handed Lily a card. Come by Monday if you're interested. That night, Lily returned to the apartment glowing. Edward looked up from his pages. Where'd you go? She handed him a folded napkin with a note written in pen. I read out loud tonight, and someone heard me. I think I found the door. He looked up at her, pride filling every part of him. You opened it, he whispered. They sat together in silence. And for once, Lily didn't feel like a passenger in someone else's journey. Growing in parallel. By the end of February, New York had thawed just enough to remind its residents that spring was waiting. Patches of dirty snow lingered between curbs, but the air had softened and sunlight lasted just a little longer each day. Lily had started teaching once a week at the Paper Lantern Book Cafe. It wasn't a traditional classroom. There were no desks, no tests. Just a circle of chairs, mismatched mugs of tea, and a group of women who had each come through something heavy. Divorce, illness, abandonment, recovery. Lily didn't try to fix them. She didn't tell them what to write. She simply invited them to say what had never been said. And in doing so, she found herself healing in the process. One of her students, a shy woman named Janelle, had once whispered, I didn't know I could still be brave. And Lily had smiled and replied, Sometimes bravery sounds like your own voice on paper. Edward, meanwhile, was thriving in the residency. His novel had taken shape. A sweeping love story set in a coastal town, full of trains, letters, and quiet courage. The directors were already murmuring about publishing deals, readings, even a potential adaptation. But with success came time apart. They still shared their mornings, their evenings, but their days, their creative lives, now belonged to different worlds. One night, Lily came home later than usual, cheeks flushed from class that had run over time. She found Edward asleep on the couch, manuscript pages scattered across his chest. He looked peaceful, tired, beautiful. She stood there for a moment, watching him, and something inside her ached, not from distance, but from change, because she realized they were no longer growing in the same direction. They were growing side by side, two trees with separate trunks, separate sunlight, but roots still touching. The next morning, over coffee, she brought it up gently. "Do you ever feel like we're drifting?" she asked. Edward looked at her, surprised. "Not drifting," he said after a moment. "Evolving." She smiled. "Good answer." "But yeah," he added, "some days I feel like I barely see you anymore. And when I do, I'm tired. And so are you." Lily nodded. "We haven't had a weekend, just us, in almost a month." He set his mug down. "Let's fix that." "How?" He pulled out his phone and showed her a listing, a quiet cabin rental in the Catskills. No Wi-Fi, just a fireplace, a record player, and a view of the stars. "We'll go," he said. "Just us. No books, no classes, no expectations. Just us remembering why this started in the first place." Lily stared at the screen, heart blooming with relief. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's disappear, for just a little while." They booked the trip that night, and as they packed their bags days later, something inside both of them settled. Not into old patterns, but into something better. They weren't returning to what they'd been. They were choosing what came next. Together. The cabin in the quiet. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, nestled in a ring of pine trees that swayed gently in the early March wind. The road to get there wound through sleepy towns and empty roads, their cell signal vanishing an hour before arrival. By the time Lily and Edward pulled into the gravel driveway, it was nearly sunset. The silence was immediate. Not the kind of silence that pressed against you, but the kind that welcomed you in. A silence with space for breath. Lily stepped out first and tilted her head toward the pale sky. "I forgot what this kind of quiet sounds like." Edward wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It's the sound of nobody needing anything from us." Inside, the cabin was simple. Wood walls, a stone fireplace, wool blankets folded neatly on the edge of a deep sofa. The bedroom held a bed covered in a thick quilt, and the windows looked out onto the still surface of the lake, where snow clung to the edges like lace. That night, after a dinner cooked slowly together, no timers, no distractions, they lit a fire and sat on the floor in front of it. The warmth settled around them like memory. For a long time, they didn't speak, and it was perfect until Lily broke the silence. "Do you think we could live like this?" she asked. "No noise, no internet, just space?" Edward leaned back on his hands, considering. "Maybe not forever," he said, "but I think we need this more often than we admit." He turned toward her. "You've changed. So have you. Do you like the version of me I'm becoming?" She smiled softly. "I love him." A pause. Then Edward reached into his bag and pulled out a leather-bound notebook, the one he used only when something felt truly important. He handed it to her. "I wrote something last night," he said. "Not for the novel, not for the residency, just for you." Lily opened it slowly. On the first page, handwritten, "To the woman who taught me that quiet doesn't mean absence, that love doesn't require fixing, that I am not a better writer because of you. I'm a better man." She kept reading. Every page held a letter, a memory, a moment, a promise, all addressed to her. Edward's version of "I love you" had always been gentle, often wordless. But here, in this notebook, he had finally said everything. By the time she reached the last page, her cheeks were wet. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said, reaching for her hand. "You've been saying it in everything you've done. And every time you stayed. Every time you asked me to stay. They spent the rest of that night curled beneath the quilt, not sleeping, not rushing, just rediscovering the edges of one another in firelight and quiet breath. The next morning, snow fell lightly. Lily stood on the porch, notebook in hand, writing again. And this time, her story wasn't about a woman who ran from silence. It was about a woman who built a life inside it, and found someone who didn't fear the stillness, but added music to it. The question that changed everything. By the time Lily and Edward returned to New York, the city had already begun shedding its winter skin. Storefronts opened their windows to the breeze. Crocuses bloomed defiantly through cracks in the sidewalk. And people walked a little slower, lingered a little longer, as if spring had taught them to breathe again. They arrived back in the apartment lighter, quieter. The cabin hadn't just given them rest, it had reminded them of their rhythm. Not the fast-paced, city-bred tempo they'd been caught in, but their own slower, deeper beat. That evening, while Edward unpacked, Lily stood by the window watching the sun dip behind the skyline. Below, the street was pulsing with life again. Food carts, music, children's laughter echoing between buildings. And suddenly, she knew. She turned toward Edward, who was bent over his laptop, scrolling through emails that had stacked up during their time off. "Ed," she said quietly. He looked up. "Yeah? I don't want to stay in the city." He froze, not in fear, but in full attention. "You don't?" She walked over to the kitchen counter, pulled out a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket, and placed it in front of him. It was a lease agreement for the little brick building in New Haven, the old storefront, the one she dreamed about. "I called Ruth before we left the cabin," Lily said, heart pounding. "She knows the landlord. They haven't had any other serious interest." He agreed to hold it for a week. Edward read the paper slowly, processing. "You want to open the bookshop?" he asked. Lily nodded. "Not just a bookshop. A space for writing circles. For people like the women in my class. For voices that don't get stages. For letters that never found mailboxes." She looked at him, her voice soft but certain. "I love this city, and I love you, but I've realized my dream lives somewhere else. Not in the noise, but in the quiet places, in the ones I can fill with story." Edward set the paper down and walked around the counter. "Then we do it," he said simply. Lily blinked. "What?" "We do it," he repeated. "We go home. But your residency ends in 2 months," he said, "and the novel's almost done. The only thing I haven't figured out yet is what comes next." "Now I know." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "You'd give all this up?" He smiled. "I'm not giving anything up. I'm moving forward. With you." He reached into his back pocket, suddenly awkward, then pulled out something small and velvet. Lily froze. Edward opened it. Inside, a simple ring. A single stone set in a silver band, elegant and quiet. "Like her. I was going to wait," he said. "Maybe take you to that spot by the lake again. But it feels right now." He looked her straight in the eyes, voice low but steady. "Will you come home with me? Not just to New Haven, but to a life we build, page by page, season by season." Lily didn't answer with words. She leaned in and kissed him. And that was her answer. Outside, the city still buzzed. But in that moment, inside their small apartment high above the noise, the world felt still and full of beginning. Final chapter, but not the end. 2 months later, they stood outside the old brick building on Main Street in New Haven, the one Lily had dreamed about since she was 23. Now it was theirs. The faded "For Lee" sign was gone, replaced with a hand-painted wooden one above the door that read, "The Quiet Chapter." Books, letters light. Inside, the shelves were slowly filling. Not with bestsellers or mass shipments, but with hand-picked titles, secondhand treasures, poetry chapbooks from local writers, and personal donations from neighbors who wandered in just to ask, "Is this really open now?" The back corner had been transformed into a writing circle space. Warm lighting, low cushions, a fireplace that Edward insisted on restoring brick by brick. The upstairs, once dusty storage, was now their home, a small loft apartment that smelled like books, coffee, and morning light. They didn't plan a grand opening. Instead, they hosted a letter-writing night. No emails, no phones, just paper, pins, and candlelight. People of all ages came, teenagers, widows, couples holding hands. Each wrote a letter, to someone they'd lost, to someone they missed, to someone they loved but never said it. At the end of the night, Lily stood before the group with tears in her eyes. "We open this place because we believe stories don't end when a chapter closes," she said. "They begin again, quieter, stronger." Twa. The crowd applauded, not wildly, but warmly, genuinely. Edward stood beside her, his arm around her waist, whispering, "You did it." "No," she said, smiling up at him. "We did." Over the next weeks, the quiet chapter became more than a shop. It became a sanctuary, a place where people found pieces of themselves on forgotten pages, where silence was welcomed, and voices returned one sentence at a time. One afternoon, a teenage girl walked in, clutching a journal to her chest. She asked if there was a place to sit. Lily showed her to the window seat. She stayed for hours. When she left, she whispered, "Thank you for making space." That night, Lily and Edward sat by the fire, watching the snow fall again, gentler this time. "We build a life," Lily whispered. "No," Edward replied, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "We're still building." Outside, winter softened the streets. Inside, two people who had once been lost in silence now lived inside a story they had written together. Not perfect, not without pain, but full of heart. And in the window of the quiet chapter, a small hand-lettered sign always remained. "This story isn't finished. Come inside and write the next page." The end is remembering what it was before flesh, before shape. She held up the device. "Then let me remind you what chaos feels like." She activated the array. It began to hum, a horrible, silent pressure that made her teeth ache. Mark recoiled as static erupted across the room. For a second, he flickered, not just visually, but existentially. His form blurred between versions of himself. A child, an old man, a soldier, a stranger. The ring behind him faltered. Its light dimmed. Outside, Core saw the countdown hit 2 minutes and 14 seconds. The null field from the satellite array was sweeping in. Everything electrical began to shut down. Even Ava's array. Inside the chamber, the device sparked and failed. Mark, or what was left of him, fell to his knees. "Why resist?" the voice pleaded, fractured and desperate. "We only wish to make you whole." Ava stood firm, her voice steady. "Wholeness without choice is not peace. It's extinction." Then, through the glass wall, a final burst of signal struck the building. The null field completed its sweep. All light vanished. The signal died, and silence, true and unnatural, swallowed everything. Seconds later, emergency lights sputtered back to life. The ring was gone. The walls had stopped vibrating. And, at the center of the chamber, lying unconscious, was Mark. Human again, but breathing. Barely. Cores entered slowly. "Did we stop it?" he asked. Ava shook her head. "No." She pointed to the far corner of the chamber, where the wall was now inscribed with fresh symbols, new ones. Still glowing. Still alive. "It's not over," she whispered. "It just changed tactics. The language that breathes." Mark awoke 2 hours later on a steel table beneath the trauma lights in Lab Sublevel 3. His eyes darted open with a jolt, but they were normal again. Human. He gasped like he'd been drowning, choking on silence itself. Ava stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him with a mix of hope and fear. "Do you remember who you are?" she asked quietly. Mark blinked several times. His lips moved, no words. Then finally, "Mark Sanders." She stepped closer. "Do you remember it?" He closed his eyes slowly. "Yes." Cores appeared behind a thick pane of reinforced glass, watching Mark through a biometric scanner. His pulse was steady, neural activity erratic but readable. "He's stable," Cores said, "but still altered." That thing didn't just possess him. It rewrote parts of his brain. Not just biology, syntax, language patterns, concept recursion, temporal feedback loops. "You're saying his thoughts were rewritten?" Ava asked. Cores nodded. "I'm saying he thinks in a language we don't have a name for. And that language might still be broadcasting. Down in the vault, Technicians in hazmat suits attempted to scan the glowing symbols that remained in the chamber's walls. But each time they approached, their gear would flicker, short-circuit, or even heat up to dangerous levels. One scientist dared to touch it. He spoke a single syllable a moment later, not English, not even sound. It was more like a shape forced into his voice. And then, he forgot his name. He collapsed, sobbing, not in pain, in confusion. He couldn't remember who he was, why he was there, or how to speak at all. Ava was informed immediately. She stared at the symbol, now burning into a containment image on a tablet. A double spiral surrounding a still, black circle. "It's evolving," she murmured. "It's learning faster than we can contain it." Mark sat alone in a sealed interview room when Ava entered. She brought no equipment, just herself. "I know you're still you," she said, "but I need to know if it's still in there too." Mark hesitated, and then he nodded. "I can feel it. Not like a voice anymore. More like an instinct. It's not speaking to me now. It's listening." "Listening to what?" Ava asked. "To us." At that same moment, a server deep in the lab's archive activated by itself. One of the breach files, previously locked and encrypted, opened on its own. A text document filled the screen. Not a log, not a report. A letter, written in English. SH. To Ava Trent and Mark Sanders. "Thank you for opening the path. You stopped the doorway, yes. But you left the window wide open. You are now the vocabulary of a new age. We don't need to arrive. We only need to be understood." Ot. Below that, a line of text scrolled. "Transmission begins. 00:00:01." Ava sprinted to the console. The countdown had begun, not to destruction, but to translation. A global broadcast was being prepared. Something in Mark's brain had become the Rosetta Stone of the breach. And soon, the world would understand. Cores shouted from the hallway, "You have 30 seconds. Either we sever Mark's neural interface, or we all learn a language that thinks back," Ava whispered. She turned toward the room where Mark waited, calm and still. He looked at her and smiled. The word that ends worlds. The countdown reached 10 seconds. Ava stood between two impossible choices. Sever Mark's consciousness and possibly kill him, or let the broadcast finish, and risk letting the breach's sentient language rewrite the minds of every living human being. Behind the reinforced glass, Mark sat still, a calm figure radiating quiet clarity, as if he'd already accepted what was coming. Core's voice echoed through the speaker. "Ava, it's your call. Do it now, or they speak through us." Ava stared at Mark, her hand trembling above the neural sever switch. He looked up, and for the first time in all this madness, he didn't look like a victim or a host. He looked awake. Then he whispered, not aloud, but directly into Ava's thoughts. "You've already heard it. It was in the silence. It was in the memory you called déjà vu. It never needed to arrive. It was always waiting for a voice. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second." Ava exhaled and lowered her hand. The screen went black. Silence. Not a crash. Not an explosion. Not the end of the world. Just silence. Then, the room began to sing. But it wasn't sound. It was awareness. A slow ripple through space, through thought, through memory, as if everyone everywhere suddenly remembered something they had never learned but had always known. A wordless recognition in the bones. People across the world stopped walking. Looked up, eyes wide, hearts quiet. Infants laughed in their sleep. Old men wept without knowing why. The breach had spoken, but not to conquer, to become. Inside the lab, Core stared blankly at the monitors. "It didn't destroy us," he whispered. "No," Ava said. "It used us." Language was the infection, and Mark was the carrier. But the goal was never death. It was evolution. She turned to Mark one last time, but his seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There were no alarms. Just a single glowing symbol on the glass, slowly fading. Infinity. Epilogue. In the years that followed, no one remembered what had happened that day. Not fully, but the world changed. Ideas flowed faster. Art became more precise. Music made people weep without reason. Children spoke truths before they learned to lie. No war followed. No disaster. just understanding. And somewhere, in the background hum of thoughts no one dared say aloud, a voice whispered, "You gave us language. We gave you meaning." The end.